Imagine for a second that you spend, I don't know, maybe 499 hours a year feeding, bathing, and driving a sick parent to medical appointments.
Which is practically a part-time job on its own.
Right. Exactly. You are completely exhausted. You're juggling this massive responsibility right alongside your actual day job.
Yeah.
But according to a new bill currently moving through Congress, all of that agonizing, invisible labor is worth, well, absolutely nothing to the IRS.
Nothing at all.
But if you push yourself just a little bit harder and you hit exactly 500 hours, suddenly you cross this invisible finish line.
Yep, you trigger the threshold.
Exactly. You're officially on the books and you qualify for a specific federal tax benefit.
It's wild how that works.
It really is. Welcome to Congress in Context, our deep dive into the legislative activity that is quietly but fundamentally reshaping American life.
Glad to be here for this one.
I am too. And for you, the listener, our mission here is simple. We take a stack of recent bills, we strip away all the partisan speeches and the noise, and we figure out what the law actually says.
Because the actual text is where the mechanics are.
The real mechanics. And just a quick housekeeping note before we jump in. This deep dive is a completely independent, ad-free civic education project.
Totally independent.
So if you find this breakdown helpful, please consider supporting the production infrastructure. There's a Buy Me a Coffee link right there in your app's show notes.
It really does keep the lights on for us.
It does. So getting into today's source material, what are we really looking at here?
Well, it is a fascinating dynamic to watch unfold. When you really dig into the source texts of these recent bills, you start to see a very distinct, deliberate trend.
Okay, a trend in how they're writing them.
Exactly. Lawmakers are increasingly trying to, govern by spreadsheet, basically.
Governed by spreadsheet. I like that.
Yeah, they are hard-coding these very strict, unforgiving numbers into the federal code. And the goal there is to try and remove any wiggle room or, interpretation down the line.
Right. It's like Congress is playing Moneyball with the law.
That's a great way to put it.
They're trying to manage the country strictly through hard data and math, rather than just leaving things up to human judgment or agency discretion.
Right, because discretion can lead to lawsuits or policy shifts.
Exactly. So today, we are looking at how this heavily data-driven approach is touching almost every facet of society. I mean, from your local national park to the warning label on your soda, all the way up to how we hold the highest executive offices financially accountable.
It really covers everything.
It does. Let's start with how lawmakers are managing our physical landscape. I'm looking at the Outdoor Americans with Disabilities Act. This is Senate Bill 2968. What exactly is the goal here?
So S 2968 requires the Secretaries of Agriculture and the Interior to prioritize updates to travel management plans on public lands.
Okay.
The stated objective is to ensure that these massive, sprawling tracts of federal land are officially classified as disability accessible.
Which sounds great on paper, obviously.
Right. But rather than just handing down a vague mandate saying, make it accessible,
Right.
Congress assigned a rigid mathematical quota to it.
So instead of trusting a park ranger on the ground to figure out what accessibility actually looks like for their specific park, they put a specific mathematical threshold right in the text.
Exactly. The bill explicitly mandates that to meet this standard, there must be at least 2.5 miles of authorized roads accessible to motorized vehicles.
Wait, 2.5 miles exactly?
Exactly, 2.5 miles. Or off-road vehicles per square mile of public land.
Wow.
Yeah, it requires the agencies to actually calculate the total length of traversable approved roads in literally every square mile they manage.
Okay, so that creates an undeniable structural baseline, like a building's floor plan.
Exactly like a floor plan.
If you only have 2 miles of road in that specific square mile grid, you fail the test. The space isn't certified as accessible.
That's the math. You fail.
But I noticed the bill also uses a specific legal term to protect those existing roads, a rebuttable presumption against road closure.
Yes, that's a very key phrase in the text.
Let's translate that for a second for the listener. A rebuttable presumption basically means the agency has to prove a negative, right?
Yep.
Like, if the Forest Service wants to close a trail, they walk into the room already losing the argument.
That is precisely what it means in practice. The default, baked-in legal state of that road is open.
Okay.
So if an agency wants to execute a closure, say, for ecological reasons or erosion, the burden of proof falls entirely on them.
They have to justify it.
Right. To overcome that rebuttable presumption, they have to provide clear and compelling evidence demonstrating that the closure fits the very narrow parameters of the act. And they have to meet specific public notification requirements first.
I have to push back on this 2.5-mile metric, though. Mechanically speaking, if we are legally mandating a specific ratio of drivable roads per square mile, aren't we basically forcing bulldozers into pristine natural habitats just to hit a congressional quota?
That's the obvious concern, right?
Yeah, I mean, how does this not spark a massive war between off-road vehicle users and conservationists?
Well, that is the exact tension this bill's trying to navigate.
Yeah.
And if you look at the source text, it does address it pretty carefully.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, the bill explicitly states that it does not establish new roads or trails in highly protected, designated areas, like the National Wilderness System.
Okay, so they carved out the wilderness areas.
Exactly. The calculation and the presumption only apply to public lands where motorized travel is already considered a generally applicable use.
I see. So it's about maximizing and guaranteeing access where cars and ATVs are already permitted rather than, paving a highway through the middle of Yellowstone.
Correct. It is optimizing the current footprint using hard data, not expanding it into roadless wilderness.
Got it. Okay, speaking of our national parks, let's look at another piece of legislation focused on the physical landscape, but from a completely different angle.
This one is interesting.
The Gateway Partnership Act. Now, this appears in both the House as H.R. 5254 and the Senate as S. 2767. This deals specifically with the Gateway Arch National Park in St. Louis.
Yes. So this legislation authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to enter into a formal agreement with a specific non-federal entity, the Gateway Arch Park Foundation. And the agreement allows this foundation to host private events in Gateway Arch National Park buildings.
Wait, hosting private events in a national park building? Like what, corporate retreats, private galas, weddings?
Exactly that kind of thing.
That feels like a very slippery slope mechanically. If we allow private exclusive events at the Gateway Arch, are we setting a precedent for, Disney-sponsored events at the Grand Canyon?
And that fear of commercializing a public asset is exactly why lawmakers applied that Moneyball approach again here.
They used strict numbers again.
Right. They didn't just give the foundation a blank check to throw parties whenever they want. The legislation outlines strict non-negotiable terms and conditions to protect the park's structural resources.
Okay, what kind of conditions?
For instance, the agreement mandates comprehensive liability insurance, and it has to be in an amount sufficient to protect the interests of the United States.
Okay, so they require a massive, presumably very expensive insurance policy. What else?
It also requires the establishment of dates, times, and a maximum number of exclusive events per week.
Ah, so there are hard event caps written right into the framework.
Yes. Furthermore, the Secretary is authorized to charge a fee that is specifically calibrated to cover any maintenance costs. So any wear and tear caused by these private events is paid for by the foundation.
Okay, so think of this, the government establishing a commercial lease framework for a public asset.
That's a perfect analogy.
It allows for private utility, but it mandates structural safeguards to prevent the degradation of the property. The private entity has to fund the public upkeep.
Right.
But I'm curious about how strict those weekly event caps are in practice. I mean, if a foundation wants to host a 3-day gala, does that count as one event or 3? When you rely entirely on numbers, people find creative ways to game the math.
And that is always the risk with hyper-specific legislation. You create a rigid boundary, and people will push right up against it. But the overarching theme here is a transition in how Congress thinks. We just talked about managing the external physical environment, our public lands.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the next set of bills in our sources, they are applying this exact same rigid rule setting to regulating the internal bodily environment.
Oh, moving to public health and consumer regulation.
Exactly.
Let's dive right into that. We have Senate Bill 5026, which deals with dietary warnings and enforcement. What is the structural objective here?
So, S5026 proposes a mandatory, highly standardized labeling framework for specific categories of food and beverages.
Okay.
For example, sugar-sweetened beverages with added sugars would be legally required to carry a warning label directly linking them to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and tooth decay.
Wow, directly on the can. And this extends beyond just soda, right?
Much further.
Yeah.
Ultra-processed foods and drinks would require warnings regarding weight gain and increased risks of obesity and diabetes. Additionally, foods containing high-intensity sweeteners would be forced to carry a label explicitly stating they are not recommended for children. The bill even restricts junk food advertising to children.
I notice in the source text that the bill authorizes $5 million annually from 2027 through 2031 for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to promulgate regulations and handle enforcement.
Yes, that's in there.
First, let's clarify that term for the listener, promulgate. That basically just means to officially write the rules and publish them so they take effect, correct?
Exactly. It is the formal administrative process of an agency turning a law passed by Congress into an actionable rule on the books.
Okay, second, and this is a massive mechanical red flag to me, $5 million.
Yeah.
For the entire federal government to enforce a nationwide mandatory labeling overhaul across the entire American grocery store industry, that sounds like an absolute drop in the bucket. Is this even enforceable, or is it just a symbolic gesture?
It's a very fair critique. I mean, $5 million spread across federal agencies for national enforcement is incredibly thin.
It's nothing.
Right. It suggests that Congress might be relying more on the threat of the law, or perhaps empowering civil litigation from consumer advocacy groups, rather than, deploying an army of federal grocery inspectors to check every cereal box.
Because they simply wouldn't have the budget for that.
Exactly.
And what about visual fatigue? I mean, structurally, does applying uniform warning labels across varying categories of ultra-processed foods risk visual fatigue for the consumer? If every single box of crackers, every diet soda, every frozen dinner has a glaring health warning on it, don't consumers just go blind to it eventually?
We have seen that with other warnings, yes.
Yeah.
People just stop registering them.
Right. Does the legislation account for that?
Well, the authors of this legislation don't really seem overly concerned with the psychology of visual fatigue.
Interesting.
The goal isn't necessarily to aggressively change behavior at every turn, though that is certainly a hope. The true legislative goal is standardizing the transmission of data.
Oh, I see.
The logic is that the consumer must be given that specific data point at the point of sale, regardless of their behavior.
So it treats the warning label just like the ingredients list or the calorie count. It legally has to be there, whether you actually read it or not.
Precisely. It's about data compliance.
Now, what happens when the public health issue isn't on a store shelf, but in a rural community that doesn't even have a hospital?
This is a major issue.
Let's talk about Senate Bill 380, the Rural Obstetrics Readiness Act.
This bill is a direct structural response to maternal health care access in rural areas that simply lack the facilities of a hospital maternity ward.
Right.
We are talking about critical access hospitals or rural clinics that operate without a dedicated obstetric unit.
Which is a terrifying reality for a lot of expecting parents in rural America. Mechanics-wise, how does this bill attempt to fix a missing hospital?
It amends the Public Health Service Act to establish an evidence-based training program. And this is specifically designed for the practitioners operating in those rural facilities.
Okay, so training the existing staff.
Right. But training isn't enough on its own. The bill also creates a new grant program to provide these facilities with the necessary physical equipment and supplies for obstetric emergency care.
So grants for emergency equipment and cross-training for the staff who are already there. What else?
It also establishes a pilot program to support teleconsultation services for maternal health care.
Teleconsultation.
Yeah, this allows practitioners in remote, underfunded areas to immediately connect via digital networks with specialized obstetricians when highly complex cases arrive.
I mean, trying to patch a missing physical hospital with Wi-Fi and iPads, rather than mandating the construction of new physical hospital wings, this legislation is attempting to bridge the infrastructure gap using digital networks and cross-training.
Exactly.
But if someone is having a life-threatening, complicated birth, is a video call with a specialist 3 states away actually going to save them?
Well, it is certainly not a perfect substitute for an in-house surgeon, and no one is pretending it is. But building a new hospital wing is incredibly capital-intensive. It takes a decade of planning and construction. Providing a grant for emergency incubators and setting up a secure video line to a specialist is something they can deploy this year.
That makes sense.
It is an operational patch for a massive systemic deficit. And interestingly, the bill also mandates a comprehensive study on maternity ward closures to gather hard data on why these rural facilities are failing in the first place.
They need the data to figure out the root cause.
Exactly.
Which is a perfect transition because we just talked about the struggle of caregiving in a clinical public health setting, but so much of the caregiving in this country happens invisibly at home by family members.
Oh, absolutely.
And Congress is looking at how to assign a numerical value to that invisible sweat equity through the tax code.
We're seeing this very clearly in Senate Bill 4292. This legislation modifies the Internal Revenue Code to permit what it officially terms qualified family caregivers to contribute to a Roth IRA beyond the standard contribution limits.
But again, going back to our theme today, they don't just leave the definition of a qualified family caregiver up for interpretation by the IRS, do they? This brings us right back to our opening scenario.
No, they absolutely do not. The legislation defines the threshold very strictly. A qualified family caregiver is an individual who has completed 500 or more hours of unpaid family caregiving tasks in a taxable year.
Exactly 500 hours.
Yes, and this takes effect for taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025.
I just keep getting hung up on the mechanical audit side of this. If I want to claim this Roth IRA extension, does the IRS demand a timesheet? Like, do I need to log every single time I drive my uncle to physical therapy or every hour I spend helping him grocery shop?
It's a massive gray area. I mean, the acceptable tasks are clearly defined in the text managing medications, providing transportation, mobility assistance, bathing, and food shopping for children or adults with special needs.
Okay, the tasks are clear.
But tracking the time spent precisely is almost impossible. By setting the bar at exactly 500 hours, they are trying to weed out the people who just help out occasionally and strictly target the primary dedicated caregivers.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Proving 500 hours versus, say, 450 hours during an audit is incredibly messy.
It feels like a paradox. Lawmakers want a clean, verifiable metric, but they are applying it to the most unverifiable, chaotic part of human life.
Exactly.
And they are doing something very similar with teachers in House Bill 5334, correct?
Yes, H.R. 5334 expands the existing educator expense deduction.
Right, for buying supplies.
Exactly. Currently, that tax parameter is limited to elementary and secondary school teachers strictly K through 12. This bill structurally expands the definition to include early childhood educators, applicable to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2024.
So this is Congress creating a financial conversion rate. It takes the invisible sweat equity of 500 hours of family caregiving, or the out-of-pocket costs of a preschool teacher, which previously didn't count, and converts it into a tangible tax mechanism.
That's exactly what it's doing.
Again, drawing a very firm boundary on who gets the relief and who doesn't.
Exactly. They are forcing the tax code to recognize labor and expenses that typically operate entirely outside the standard economic framework, but only if you meet their exact criteria.
Speaking of firm boundaries and exact criteria, let's examine our final legislative highlight today. We are shifting gears from caregivers and teachers to look at the highest levels of executive power.
Right, a big shift.
Senate Bill 4299, the Ban Presidential Plunder of Taxpayer Funds Act.
Which is quite a title.
That title alone is certainly not pulling any punches.
No, it's a highly specific, very aggressive piece of executive accountability legislation.
What does it do mechanically?
S 4299 explicitly prohibits presidents, vice presidents, their spouses, and their dependent children from recovering damages, reimbursements, or attorney's fees from the United States government.
So it completely blocks the flow of federal taxpayer funds to cover those specific legal costs for executive office holders.
Completely blocks it.
What happens if they violate it?
The violations carry severe quantified penalties. If a covered individual violates this prohibition, they face up to $1 million in civil fines or up to 5 years in prison, along with the disgorgement of any payments received.
Okay, pause for a second. Disgorgement. That essentially means the court turns them upside down and shakes their pockets until all the illegal profits fall out, right?
Well, that is a very colorful way to put it, but yes, it means legally compelling the individual to pay back every single cent of the ill-gotten funds.
And what about civil actions? If one of these individuals tries to sue the U.S. government, how does the bill handle that?
The bill limits damages in civil actions against the U.S. to purely actual or compensatory damages. This outright bars punitive damages unless certain highly specific conditions are met, such as the appointment of an independent counsel. Furthermore, it sets the statute of limitations for enforcement at exactly 10 years after the offense is committed, and it tolls the statute of limitations for underlying claims while the individual holds office.
Let's clarify that phrase for you listening, tolls the statute of limitations. That means the clock pauses, correct?
Yes.
So if you were the president for 4 years, that time in office doesn't count toward the 10-year expiration date on prosecuting the crime.
Exactly. The clock freezes while you have the power of the office.
I think it is vital to look at this impartially. This isn't just a policy statement. It is a structural barrier installed in the federal code to permanently sever specific financial pipelines between executive office holders and the Treasury.
That's the structural reality.
By capping the civil fines at exactly $1 million, setting a 5-year prison metric, and a hard 10-year statute of limitations, Congress is building a very precise, inescapable legal cage.
That is the reality of the bill. It completely removes executive branch involvement from the processing of these claims. In fact, it requires a court order for any department or agency to even process a claim for reimbursement from a covered individual.
Wow. So as we pull all of these sources together, what does this tell us about the current operating system of Congress? Why are they so obsessed with these exact numbers across all these different domains?
What these bills collectively signal is a deep reliance on strict numerical thresholds to assert power over federal agencies.
Right.
Lawmakers know that if you leave a statute vague, it gets tied up in litigation, or an agency head interprets it in a way the original authors never intended.
Right. If Congress just says protect the environment, one administration might interpret that as banning all cars, and the next administration might interpret it as just picking up litter.
Precisely. Whether it is requiring exactly 2.5 miles of accessible road per square mile, or setting exactly 500 hours of unpaid labor to qualify for a Roth IRA extension, or authorizing exactly $5 million annually for labeling enforcement, Congress is trying to hardwire the administrative state.
Hardwire it?
Yeah. They're using fixed metrics to force agencies to act in highly specific ways, trying to remove human ambiguity from federal administration.
They want a system that executes like software. But as we've discussed today, human lives and the reality of governing a massive country don't always fit neatly into a spreadsheet.
They rarely do.
Which is why understanding these bills is so incredibly crucial for all of us. I want to express my sincere gratitude to you, the listener, for spending your time with this deep dive today. We know how complex these topics can be, and taking the time to understand the structural realities of our government is vital.
It really is the bedrock of civic engagement.
It is. And as a quick housekeeping note, because this is an ad-free resource, the production of this show relies entirely on listener support. We don't take corporate sponsors because we want to keep this analysis completely independent.
So we can just look at the facts.
Exactly. So if you want to help us keep breaking down these bills, please consider supporting the production infrastructure via the Buy Me a Coffee link in your app's episode description.
It truly is what allows us to do this kind of detailed analysis.
Yeah.
And if you want to take action on the information we've discussed today, we highly encourage you to go directly to the source. The primary texts are all publicly available.
Yes. Direct your browser to congress.gov. You can search for the specific bill numbers we mentioned today, like S2968 for the Public Lands Access, or S4299 for the Executive Accountability Parameters, and you can read the text yourself.
It's all right there.
You can track upcoming committee markups on these bills and easily find the contact information for your specific representative so you can voice your perspective.
And I would add a note on participating beyond just voting or calling your representative.
Oh, absolutely.
Many of the policies we discussed today rely on federal agencies for execution. Attending local town halls or submitting public comments during agency rulemaking phases, such as when the Department of the Interior actually begins updating those travel management plans, or when the FDA starts drafting those food labels, those are incredibly direct ways to influence how the mechanics of these policies are applied on the ground in your own community.
That is such a great point. The law passed by Congress is just the blueprint. The agency rulemaking is the actual construction of the building. And before we go, we always like to leave you with something to chew on.
Right. So building on everything we explored today, here is a structural question to consider. We've seen how Congress relies heavily on setting fixed numerical thresholds, like exactly 500 hours to qualify as a caregiver, or as seen in another piece of legislation in our sources, S4287, requiring exactly 15-year minimum terms for grantor trusts to prevent tax avoidance. Do these rigid metrics successfully prevent systemic abuse by creating crystal clear boundaries, or do they inadvertently exclude the people whose legitimate lived situations fall just 1 hour or 1 mile short of the legal definition?